Oh, my favorite memory of your father is probably my trips to Ossipee to go ice fishing. Now, I'm a Florida guy, and ice fishing was as strange as anything I could ever imagine. And I made a group of friends centered around your dad and your grandfather that has lasted me my lifetime now. I think we went ice fishing between New Hampshire and Vermont. I think we went for 25 or 26 years. Hardly caught a fish. Enjoyed ourselves. Never had any problems among us. We did have one big episode in Ossipee. It was the year that the series came out referred to as Roots. Half the group wanted to play cards in the dining room, and the other half of the group, which I was part of, we have found a television and got it onto the channel where Roots was going to be broadcast. And we could not quiet down the card players while we tried to watch Roots, and Roots was not much of an incentive for them to be quiet. And that was a memory of him because he wanted to play cards and he didn't care to watch the show Roots. I love that old guy, and I miss him. I really miss him. Jim Brugman, Jimmy, asks, what was my dad's favorite beverage and place to relax with all the guys? Well, his favorite beverage, to my knowledge, was always a glass of cold beer. And the places that he relaxed with the guys, in my day with him and in years later, was usually the places like the Officers Club on the naval base, and there was a place called the Datum, which was an officers club on the Newport Naval Base. And that's where he did his socializing with the guys. And of course, there were many social outings for Peggy and Tom and Barbara and I. So I would always say his favorite drink probably was just the cold beer. Mike Brugman would like to know one crazy story about Dad, and I would like to know how you two met and would like to know how you guys hit it off. Well, we didn't ever hit it off very well. We used to argue about everything, and he and I were so close together in rank that we were like separated by 2 numbers based on all the naval officers. So I wound up as a senior watch officer on the Compton, and that meant that I was the one assigning people to watch this. And he would always tell me, and he'd tell the captain and the XO too, that the engineers could not be expected to stand watch on the quarterdeck because they worked so hard when we were at sea. Well, I already knew that lots of the other rates worked very hard when we were at sea, and I would only draw on an engineer if I absolutely just had to fill a spot. So he told me, he said, don't you do it, you'll be really sorry, I'll get even with you somehow. Well, I assigned him that night, and your father slept in the after part of the ship, after her officer's quarters. And his room had a curtain across to the passageway. So anyhow, I thought it would be smart for me, not smart, but wise, to go back and tell him personally that I had assigned his man to a quarterdeck watch. Well, he got up. He was asleep, and when he woke up from hearing that, he was so infuriated, he jumped out of his bunk and was making a fist like he was going to punch me, when I jumped out through the curtain to his room and started running down the passageway, at the very moment the executive officer entered the passageway. And his eyes were set like a charging bull. He didn't see who that person was that had just come into the passageway. And I sidestepped him, and he punched the executive officer in the chin so hard it knocked him out. Well, he saw to it that the exec was all right, but this was really a serious offense for officers to be behaving like that, and particularly striking the executive officer. So he ran forward to the captain's cabin, awoke the captain, and confessed that quick. He said, "I hit the exec, but I really thought it was going to be Bob Fay, and I'm sorry, I just want you to know that I did it, and I'm sorry." He was forgiven. It was a real mistake. He never meant to hit the exec, but I often wondered, what if he had hit me? Would he have been forgiven so easy? I didn't assign any more of his men to the quarterdeck watch, I'll tell you that. And but we really hit it off well, and we worked on the bridge together. We were both ship drivers, steering the ship and doing exercises, and he was in charge of the anti-air warfare on the bridge, and I was in charge of the anti-submarine warfare on the bridge. And our general quarters uniform, we each wore a big Cape Hawk life jacket. So as we'd go to cross from one side of the bridge to the other, we would get stuck to each other like two Pillsbury doughboys, squeezing through this narrow space with these great big life jackets on. And we both did our jobs very well, and we were the best of friends. But everything was so competitive between us, it made our days go by with a lot of happiness and joy. We hit it off well, Mike. You can be proud of your dad. He was a good naval officer. Maria wants to know, I would like to know about your favorite memory while ice fishing in Ossipee with my gramps, my dad, and who was a better fisherman, you or my dad? Well, in Ossipee, there were a lot of us guys, I think 15 or 17, and none of us, other than our dearly departed Frank Hansen, were fishermen. Now, you have to see the difference here. None of us had done ice fishing except Frank Hansen, and he had been assigned to Navy ships that went to the South Pole every year on that special cruise the Navy would make with scientists. So Tom and I weren't very good at ice fishing, and I don't think we ever got fish on the same trip or day that we would compare to each other. It wasn't part of our that wasn't part of what we were doing. What I remember most about your father and grandfather were, we would play poker at night, and we'd play for money. And you may not remember, but your grandfather, Frank, had been a newspaperman with the Boston Globe for his whole career. So he had a record, he said, of playing poker. But the truth was, he was a horrible poker player. He just was, because he'd get a couple of drinks in him, and pretty soon he'd be hanging his hand down so that everybody at the table could see what cards he was playing. And so we wouldn't make him look like a bad poker player. We would always take like one of those big plastic bags the newspaper comes in, and fill it up with poker chips and loose change and all that. and take it up and tuck it in bed with him when we put him to bed at night. We were always worried about him making the stairs on his own, but he did. And then one little side story to that is we used to worry about Frank getting cold. He was the oldest guy in the group, so he got to sleep with an electric blanket. But one little side story on that was that each of us guys that loved your grandfather also would go upstairs behind him and turn the heat of the electric blanket up one notch. So by the time we all had him put in bed, he was cooking under probably number 10 on the blanket. And then he'd come down in the morning and apologize to everybody because of how bad he beat us at poker. That was one of my favorite incidences with your grandfather and your father. Your father was in on that too, you know. Let's see.
Here's a bonus question.
I got a bonus question from Maureen Anderson. My dad's reaction to receiving my mom's telegram about his first son. I remember seeing a picture of my dad with a cigar in his mouth and holding up a cake that said it's a boy cake. I don't remember that so much about the cake, but I do remember that a special flag had been made and was run up the flagpole when Jimmy was born. That part I remember, but I don't remember anything about a cake. And he wasn't a cigar smoker, but he might have just done that because in those days that was kind of the custom to give everybody either a boy or a girl cigar after the birth of a child.
Wrap it up.
I'll wrap it up, all right. I got to reiterate that Tom Brugman was one of the finest naval officers I knew. He was a seaman. He could do anything that the Navy required of him. He was always cheerful. He could misbehave with the worst of us. He loved his family, and he was very proud of everything his family did and everyone that was in it. And I got to say again and again, he was one of my best friends ever, and I was so saddened that he finally was overtaken by MS. Miss you, Tom. Little P.S. here is, I hope you and Frank Hansen and Frank Brugman are having a good time where I know you guys all are right now. I'd say I wish I could join you, but that'll come in time. Look forward to seeing you then, and all you kids, keep up the good family traditions that you guys have. Is that going to do it, Jeff?
It's going to do it. Perfect. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.